you found the session 2 days ago to be helpful. And hopefully you got to do some of your homework a little bit with triggers and kind of thinking through an emergency plan for yourself. So yes, just as a quick reminder, so I put up some of the slides. This is still our agreements from before. So we remember if something comes up, you can speak what has heart and meaning. You can take risks. Confidentiality times 2. If you're meeting with a buddy later to talk about this and they're sharing, oh, wait a second. Confidentiality times 2. And yes, and otherwise you're welcome if you have any questions over the course of this or anything that you need to say at that time, we can stop and do that. We always remember to slow down to the speed of wisdom. So let's close our eyes for a moment, take a few breaths. And I have a quote from Henry Nouwen from Bread for the Journey. He says, "To listen is very hard. It asks of us so much interior stability that we no longer need to prove ourselves by speeches, arguments, statements, or declarations. The listeners no longer have an inner need to make their presence known. They're free to receive, to welcome, to accept. Listening is much more than allowing another person to talk while waiting for a chance to respond. Listening is paying full attention to others and welcoming them into our very beings. The beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking our words more seriously, and discovering their true selves. Listening is a form of spiritual hospitality by which you invite strangers to become friends, to get to know their inner selves more fully, and even to dare to be silent with you." And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So, if you remember 2 days ago when I was sharing some of my triggers, I said our triggers often come from things that have happened in the past, but they might also have something to do with our values. And I mentioned values, and I said I would talk about values more, and now is the time. So values is a big thing in compassionate listening. So we have something which we call the 3-part listening, which is so today I'm planning to go over 3-part listening, some deepening questions, and then I'm going to skip ahead to how to have difficult conversations. So, and that's hopefully this will all make sense and we can chat about it later if it doesn't. So with 3-part listening, what happens is we usually, when we're in disagreement with someone, we're listening to the facts of their story, and we might have totally different facts. Maybe you and I went to the same event and we came away and we have a totally different account of what just happened. Well, there's something we do in compassionate listening called this: facts, feelings, and values. So it's a little like an iceberg, like a triangle. So facts are kind of what's above the surface. So, and this is usually when we're in arguing with folks. But I have a lot of things in here. Thank you though. So facts are the first part, but it's not even the most important part. So we can disagree about the facts of something. But even deeper, we all want to think we're very rational beings, but we're not. And so below the facts, and more like significant for us than the facts, is actually our feelings about what's going on. So depending on how we feel, and you might notice that, like maybe you'll interact with one person who you already like, and they'll do something, and then later someone else who you don't like will do the same thing, and it will bother you that time, but it didn't bother you before, even though it was the same thing, because you have feelings about that second person that are worse than the feelings about the first person. And so feelings are bigger than facts in terms of how they impact us. But below those are our values, or in nonviolent communication, they talk about needs. And a lot of values and needs can kind of be the same kind of thing. And so there's this trick we do in compassionate listening. I think of it kind of like a Jedi mind trick, where if I'm disagreeing with someone, then if they're talking to me, rather than saying, no, I don't think it's like that. Here, did you read the scientific report that says this? Let me send you an article. Well, I've read a lot of books about this. I really know what I'm talking about. That, I don't know if you've noticed, that doesn't really help. I don't know, maybe it helps for you. It never really helps for me. People kind of have their version of what's going on. But so what I try to do, rather than kind of getting into disagreement, is really listen to understand, well, where is the person coming from? What do they really care about here? Like, what's really important for them? And then rather than even reflecting back, sometimes people say, like, well, you want to do active listening, where you, like, reflect back what they said. I heard you say that, you were impacted by the situation, this person yelled at you, rather than even doing that, saying like, wow, I can hear that you felt really insulted at the time. I can understand, respect and sincerity are really important to you. Reflecting back the values. And this really interesting thing happens where people feel more heard when you reflect back the values that come through than even if you reflect back just what they said. And so suddenly they feel understood. So people actually feel deeply understood when you do this. And usually they're very surprised. It's kind of funny because if they expect animosity and if they expect a fight and you do this, at first they're confused. And you'll notice this sometime where, they say like, well, it's like this. And you're like, oh yeah, I can understand that. You're like, yeah, well, of course it's, wait a minute. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That is true. That is how I feel about this. And they really soften and they open up. And remember, we're always trying to help. How do we get ourselves and other folks back into that heart space, that blue heart space over there? And this really helps people feel understood.
Good morning, everyone.
So we call facts, feelings, and values the life raft of compassionate listening. And I said that if you forget everything else, at least if you remember this part, it can be useful because you can always use this if you come back to that. If you're really like, man, I don't know how to connect to this person, or I feel like we're just locked in this disagreement. If you start doing this, it'll really change the dynamic of what's going on. Do you need some help?
No, it's fine.
Are you okay?
There is one more chair. It's fine.
Okay. So here is a list of values. So this is not a comprehensive list. There's many, many, many. And I'll put these up. I feel bad. The view is so nice. I feel bad putting paper on the wall so we can't see outside. But here are some possible values. And so one thing that happens is in a given situation, I might value something different. Like we all, values are what they are. And one of the beautiful things about talking about values is no one's values are wrong. But in a given situation, we might have a different hierarchy of values. So if I really value fun, and if Bernie really values kind of determination and getting things done, then we might be in a situation where I'm like, oh, it's a beautiful day. You know what? I know we were supposed to sit and have a workshop, but let's just go explore. Like, let's all hang out in the dome car right now and see this. And she might be getting really frustrated because she's like, I really value hard work and determination, and we have a lot that we have to do today. Yes, and Sheila has a game about this sort of very thing.
Values and needs.
It's perfect.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we can look through those. And so you can have them kind of in opposition to each other. Or like if I really value connection, a couple times this has happened to me where I've had house guests staying for a couple weeks and I really value connection and community. But if they really want to make sure they're not, I don't know, a problem or imposing, they're really valuing independence. And so I'll feel kind of sad because I'm like, oh, I was thinking while you're in town, we can do all this cool stuff. They're like, no, it's okay. Don't worry. Stick to your schedule. I have a plan. I'm fine. And then I feel like, like, oh, okay, this isn't landing in the same way. I thought this was going to go differently, right? But what's beautiful is no one's values are wrong. You're never going to say like independence is wrong, connection is wrong. Why would you value security? In Israel and Palestine, it's very common that Israelis really value security and safety. And so they're like, we need to be safe at all costs. But Palestinians especially value liberation and having autonomy and independence and freedom of movement. So then you have situations where they're like, listen, I'm stuck in checkpoints for hours a day. And that's like, I can't even get to my job. I can't live my life. And Israelis say, but we need this for security. Well, there's nothing wrong with security, and there's certainly nothing wrong with liberation. But now we're in opposition to each other. But when you're able, like on a personal level at least, and to say like, okay, I can get where you're coming from. What is some way that we can make both those things happen? So I hear that you really value security, but I value liberation. How can we work together on this? So it's a way of not making the other person wrong. Otherwise, you can kind of get into, and this is what we would see, this like, well, okay, what are the statistics? Like how safe did the wall around the West Bank really make Israelis? Let's argue about it forever. So this is a way of kind of shifting the dynamic. And I see in personal interactions, this works really well. So this is what we often kind of try to do. I also really like a lot of these systems. So I like the Enneagram a lot. There are also, some people are really into like spiral dynamics or like Myers-Briggs. And you'll see how values show up in those things. So for instance, like in the Enneagram, I'm a type 9, which is the peacemaker. So I really value harmony. And my husband's a type 1, so he really values like honesty and integrity. So we'll have situations where like someone else is kind of, getting persnickety, and Samira will be like, but that's not true. That they're wrong about that. I'm like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. We're fine. But if we understand that about each other, like, oh, right, you really value honesty and integrity. Of course, that would be really important if you feel like that person's not being honest. So how can we address that? So it's just a different way of understanding where we're coming from, rather than assuming that like, well, my values should be the values for everybody. All these values are important. Yes. And so what we do, so this is our list, and I can have this available later if you're interested. And so what we end up doing is an exercise where we break it up. So I'll do this in a very short period of time, so I have enough time. So I'm going to quickly tell a story about something that happened in my family. And so I want some folks, so maybe can you two listen for the facts of what I said? And then can you listen for the feelings behind what I'm saying? Both my feelings and what you think the feelings of the other person in this story would be. And if you all listen for the values. And so I'll tell the story, and then I'll ask you first, and then you, and then you. And you'll be amazed what comes through in doing this. So the story is, my dad was one of 5 sons, and his oldest brother, Uncle Ray, passed away a couple years ago during COVID. And when Uncle Ray was a younger man, he was quite difficult. And he was someone who always kind of felt like he knew the right way to do things, and he could be quite bossy. And he got on the family's nerves a lot. And he also had right-wing politics, which is important for the sake of the story. But later on in his life, he was a Methodist minister. He ended up moving to Belize, and he actually really changed his life. And he ended up adopting some local kids there and raising them. He and his wife raised the kids. And then he worked and ran a halfway home and helped a lot of folks getting out of prison and who had addiction issues, and really helped get them, jobs and back on their feet, and did a ton of work in the community. So when he died, the only people who were still talking to him from the family were my father and I. And we would email him. So his kids contacted us and said, I know it's during COVID, but can we do an online funeral for him? And can you get the rest of the family to come? And so we tried to do that, and the rest of the family wouldn't come. And so my Aunt Sue, who married one of my dad's brothers, was very upset that she felt like I was pressuring her into trying to attend this funeral. And she said, listen, he was a terrible person. Like, we argued so much, and I'm allowed to cut people out of my life. And and I remember at one point she said, I think you're just defending him because you're also a minister, and maybe you're just like him. And so we had a big fight about it, and she wouldn't talk to me for about a year after that, because she felt like I was pressuring her to attend the funeral. And I felt very sad about it, and then I felt really sheepish, kind of going back to his family in Belize and saying, none of them are going to come to the online funeral. It's just Dad and me. But at least I'll bring pictures and I'll do slides and that kind of thing. And so we had the funeral without them. So that is my story. So you don't have to say everything I just said, but what are some of the facts that I just said?
There was a big split in the family.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's 5 brothers, and one was on one side and 4 were on the other. That's what I heard.
Right.
Yeah, and even though he changed according to some people,
Yeah.
some others didn't accept that, didn't believe he had.
Right. Yeah.
So then,
I mean, there are lots
So
of
that's-
little details, but
There are lots, but that's the
but so
gist.
then in the
Yeah.
funeral, they assumed that he hadn't changed, or
And then they
their
didn't-
perception was that he hadn't changed, so they didn't have one head.
Right. That's right. So, okay, what are some of the feelings that you think that I had around the situation, and that you think my Aunt Sue had around the situation?
Sadness,
Sadness.
hurt,
Hurt.
feeling judged,
Feeling judged. Yeah.
feeling of failure maybe, for not managing to get together.
Yeah. That's right. Disappointment.
Yeah, disappointment, anger.
What do you think are some of the feelings Aunt Sue had?
Oh, that was the feeling judged.
Oh, feeling judged. Oh, yeah.
Innocent,
Resentful
and it hurt on her part.
and hurt. Oh, yeah.
Very defensive of her
Defensive.
original decision.
Right. So, what are some of the values, thank you, that you think that I have and that Aunt Sue has based on that story?
You have a sense of unity and respect for diversity.
I would have said loyalty.
Loyalty. Yeah.
Yes.
I think there's honor in there somewhere.
Thank you. And as I mean, it was expectations, like how we're supposed to treat each other. So I mean, that's good. She had high values around.
Autonomy, her own autonomy, her own choice.
Yeah, yeah.
To not be there, that's that autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Freedom.
For you, generosity.
Yeah.
And to even though they disagree, didn't want to attend, still went that extra mile to make the videos and whatever, and to have it in case someone changes them.
Right.
It's forgiveness, value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some we're able to forgive, but some we're not.
Right. Forgiveness and like redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, and it's so cool because even I've used this example a couple times. And good thing my aunt will watch the video and feel awkward about it. And but each time when folks say like, "Oh, I can tell you value loyalty or generosity or forgiveness," it feels really touching because I'm like, "Yeah, I do. I don't have to say I value loyalty. It comes through." And so even though I'm doing it like it's a true story, it's a real thing, but even though we're doing it as an exercise, it feels really touching for me to hear that that comes through. And so normally now I would answer any questions and then we'd break out into groups of 4 and we would all take turns doing this. So we don't have time for that now. If you do want to do that on the train, because we have a lot of time on the train, you're welcome to do that. And it gives you practice with values. Yeah.
So you're trying to look at your aunt in a positive and not that she's close-minded and has been hurt, she's not so trying to find her values that those feelings were based on.
Yeah.
Other than that, I mean, that's what I was trying to find when she had standards for we treat people with loving and respect, giving. I don't know how you find her. If you're looking at her values, where are you finding those? That's what you're trying to respond to.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she has a lot of integrity. I think she values autonomy. She values protecting the family. Like I know, so valuing family, like definitely feeling like I don't want to bring my kids to something to celebrate him. He was not a good person. I don't want to raise them to think that they're obligated. It's interesting because sometimes I've told this story with folks who are queer, who often have a lot of stories about like families who've disowned them or treated them really badly. And so there's much more of an understanding of like chosen family. You can have your chosen family. Like just because you're related to someone doesn't mean you need them in your life forever if they don't treat you well. So also like self-respect, and I get that, and it made me more sad that she thought that I was defending him because we were both clergy, than that she didn't come. You know what I mean? Like it made me more sad that she thought I was like defending bad behavior than that she said, no, I have self-respect and I'm protecting my family and we're not going to this funeral, But we have a different story about what happened, I guess, and things are messy, So yeah, so thank you. So that's the kind of thing we do. And I know folks often say, I wasn't sure if they're walking through. Folks often say, well, I don't know, how can I tell what the values would be? But they come through when you tell a story. And we do another exercise in week 8, and it's the week that I don't send the slides in advance because it's a trick. Where what we do is we say, okay, you're going to break out into small groups and you're going to tell a story and feel free to take your position strongly. So I could have been like, gosh, my aunt, she was so rude about this, and da, da, da. And then later on, it's like, now retell the story from your aunt's perspective. You know, well, man, I'm trying to protect my family, and then here she is, she's bothering me, and she doesn't accept my decision, and you know what I mean? So what are the different perspectives here? You know, how do we understand things from the other perspective? Yes, so I have time for maybe one or two questions about that. Otherwise, I'll move to the next part for deepening questions. Yes, Gordon and then Jan.
Was your aunt aware that the person in question there had cheese?
She felt like he was doing the work that he was in Belize in order to convert people to Christianity. So she didn't feel like it was for the sake of helping the people. She felt it was to get them to go to church. And that may have partially been true. I don't know. I never visited him when he was there. But I know that some of the guys who he helped were the ones who carried the casket. And they actually like dug, they have a sort of mausoleum kind of situation there where they don't bury the body in the ground. They have a structure that they put it in. And from everything I could tell, the community was really devastated when he died. But I know she felt like it wasn't just honest intentions. You know, it was
Ulterior motive.
ulterior motives. Exactly. So yes, Jan?
And has she suffered in any way since then?
She and I talk now. She doesn't talk to me about that. She knows I don't like Donald Trump, and so I guess I'm redeemable in her eyes. So she doesn't, I think she thought that I was right wing or something after this, which I found really confusing. So we do talk, and we were both bemoaning the situation about a week or so ago. But we don't talk about this, you know. And it makes me kind of sad, you know, and I really value redemption. You couldn't teach compassionate listening if you didn't think people could come back to the heart,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you thought like, well, that's, you know, you're a goner,
Yeah.
then I wouldn't do this kind of stuff.
But you're still talking. She could still talk.
She could, yes.
It could. It could, but I have to be very careful. I'm also not someone that shuts people out,
Right.
but I now know that she is. So I'm more careful.
Right. Sure. But you're
Yeah.
both still alive and talking.
We're both still alive and talking.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Did she experience at all or understand the big shift in your uncle? Like that he had been this way, but then he changed?
Well, no, she thought she thought it was ulterior motives.
Yeah.
It was just to get people in the community to go to church and to believe in Jesus. So that was, and she's not a person of faith at all.
So there's something in her background that makes her a negative toward that.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that's true. Yes.
So in some conflict transformation approaches, they talk about intentions and experience.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Positions and interests.
Yes.
say that again.
Yeah.
Positions and interests.
Positions and interests.
Mm-hmm.
So your aunt has a position
Mm-hmm.
about him, but she doesn't understand his interests
Oh,
or
interesting.
like what he was really, his values.
Yeah.
She wasn't able to probe deep enough to understand his values. And she
That might
assumed
be true.
some values,
Right.
which were not his values. Maybe,
Right.
right?
Well, and this is where I think she has a lot of trauma in a religious sense. And so that makes her very suspicious, which is why I think she went to that, wait, you're clergy, so you're like him too now.
Yeah.
And I think that's why she made that, yeah. But that's why the second week we talk about working with triggers. And it's interesting because I have taught this occasionally and people are like, well, listen, I know you have lots of trauma from the Middle East, but the rest of us are normal. And like, why are you bringing this up right away? And I'm like, oh, you'd be surprised. You would be surprised what we all have, you know, that affects us. And then we can't hear other perspectives because we have, nope, that's the position I'm taking based on past experience, you know. So thank you. So I want to make sure that we have time for the next part. So, yes. So thank you for that. So the next thing we're going to do is called deepening inquiry or deepening questions. And so we just listen to the person. We reflected back facts, feelings, and values. or just values, however you want to do it. And now sometimes people say, well, how much do you actually talk in compassionate listening? And you can talk a good bit. And the first way that we can talk is through asking questions. And so with deepening inquiry, so it's common, when we're in conversation with folks that we ask questions. Hopefully, I hope you do ask questions when you talk to people. Please do. So often, the kind of questions we ask, though, have a particular tenor. And so deepening inquiry or deepening questions are a bit different. So they're not for the sake of satisfying our own curiosity. So it isn't like, oh, wait, you said your uncle was in Belize. Well, where in Belize was he? I went on vacation there. So I'm just kind of wondering. I wonder if I was in that spot. So they're not those kind of questions, not showing off our knowledge. Like, oh, when I was in Belize, let me tell you about the kind of thing I did. Or like trying to ask oh, I'm going to ask a really good question. I'm going to be a perfectionist about this. So it's not that kind of thing. Not couching questions or questioning choices. So I heard you say that, you kept asking your aunt if she'd come to the funeral. So I'm just wondering, did you think that was a good idea? Really, you're going to wear that? Those kind of questions. Maybe, making sure you're not asking questions that are obviously why would you be stupid like that? Or like that kind of thing. What were you thinking? Don't ask those kind of questions in this. Demonstrating our listening skills. Sometimes when we're new to compassionate listening, it can be kind of funny where we're like, oh, well, in this part of your story, you said this thing. And, that kind of let me prove that I'm really listening. And that's still about us, right? So it's not about that. And not offering opinions. So figuring out a question version of, how do I offer my own opinions? So, well, when you did ask her if she wanted to come to the funeral, did you tell her that maybe if you do it online, it'd be different? And you couldn't use this new platform on Zoom. I don't know if you know much about that. It's really helpful, those kind of things. So the way we describe it usually is the speaker, the one who's the original talker, and then you have the speaker and the listener. And so the speaker is driving the car. So as the listener, it's not a good idea to reach over and grab the steering wheel. So you want to let the speaker have the steering wheel. So asking these kind of questions, we're kind of saying, I get that you're driving, but I really want us to go over here now. So let's go over here. Right? Because that's how it kind of is. And sometimes it happens that we're like, okay, I'm listening. But then we're like, oh no, you're really starting to open up and I'm kind of freaked out. And it's one thing if you're freaked out because you're like, I only have 2 minutes and I'm worried now you're talking about your mother and I don't think I have time for that, So that's different where you can say, I really appreciate that you're opening up about this. I'm really sorry I don't have time right now for that. Can we make another time that we can really talk about this more? So that makes sense. But it's also, you want to make sure you have enough grounding that unless the person's really sharing something that you're like, okay, this is really, I have no idea what to do with this knowledge right now, that you're like, okay, how do I stay present with this? Rather than oh, you're starting to cry. I don't like that. Let's quick get you out of there so you don't cry, So make sure that we're grounded so we can hold space for that, So the kind of questions then we want to ask are to help the speaker to be able to drive to a place that's going to help them get back to the heart. So what can we do? So the type of questions, questions that will increase our understanding and empathy. So on the next page, I have a whole list of these kind of questions. So, what's going to really help? Let's go deeper into the story. That's why they're called deepening questions. Tell me more. What was that like for you? How do you feel about that? Wow. I want to learn more about you. So helping them really stay in their experience, not directing where they're going. Helping them deepen into the experience, following the speaker, not the listener. Again, letting them control it. Helping evoke ultimate concerns and reveal values. So that's why I really get into the heart of it. So if they're kind of stuck in the castle version, what are the kind of things we can ask that'll open up? And it can help the speaker understand themselves better. Because again, we all have our interior world. We have a lot going on that we're not even aware of in a given situation. So what we often do when we practice these is we model with body language. So say if Lori and I are partners in this. So I say, okay, I'm going to pretend that you're my aunt. And so if you take on her perspective, I'm going to try to test some questions. So, and with your body language, you're going to tell me. So if I say Exactly. See, you've already done this before. Clearly, you know what this is like.
I know.
So I could ask a question that sends someone to their head. So I could say, like, you know, where were you on the night of July 31st when I contacted you? And you're like, wait, where was I? What was going on that day? Or, you know, like, well, were you worried you couldn't use the technology? And then you're like, well, could I? You know, or it can be like a really, like, well, you know, why don't you want our family to be together? You know, like, okay, no, I don't like that question. I'm not answering that question. Or it could be like very basic opening, like, well, thanks for agreeing to meet with me. You know, I know that we fought a lot in the past. I'm hoping we won't fight today. You know, and you're like, okay, like, all right, barely, just barely, you know, versus more like, well, what was it like for you? I hear that you didn't want to be there, you know, at the funeral, and I'm just wondering, like, what was your experience like with Uncle Ray? You know, like, you know, I totally get you not wanting to celebrate someone who you had such a hard time with. You know, I'm just wondering, like, you know, how does it feel now that he's gone? You know, what are the kind of questions we can ask that can help? You know, and we test these, and it's actually so fun because in compassionate listening circles, if I'm going to have a difficult conversation with someone, I can call another facilitator and say, can we practice on Zoom? I'm scared I'm going to do it wrong. So they say, give me the background. And then we practice, and I'm like, oh, I thought this was like this, and you said it was like this. Man, here, help me with it. You know, and we can really practice these kind of things. So usually that's one of our exercises. So the type of questions, examples of deepening questions. Would you like to say more about that? So this is our most basic one. You'll often hear me say that. And we say that if the person hasn't revealed very much at all, or if they've just said something kind of shocking. So I think I told you guys when the person said everyone in Gaza should be killed, our first question was like, wow, would you like to say more about that? And I remember on that delegation, we actually had a comedian from Canada. And later on that night when we were debriefing, he said, yeah, what I wanted to say is, would you like to say less about that? So sometimes I think about that. But if you're like, I don't know what you mean, or like, I don't even know where to go with that, would you like to say more? You know, how has this situation affected your life? What was that like for you? What's the source of your courage? What life experiences have helped you in this situation? This can be really good if you're trying to talk to someone who often is in a kind of victim perspective, and we have a whole thing about the drama triangle, and do we tend to go to the rescuer, the victim, or the perpetrator? If someone's often in like the victim kind of perspective, questions about like, what is the source of your courage? What was that like for you? You know, how has this affected you? What could you do right now? Those can be really good because they give autonomy back to the person if they often feel like they don't have any control over the situation. If the situation were fully resolved, how would things be better for you? That's always really good if you have someone who's kind of like an Eeyore kind of person that sees the downside of everything, then to help them start to think about what could be good. And again, it's not to manipulate them, it's not to like make them drive the car, but how can we get to the heart if someone's really stuck in that castle, in that defensiveness, or in that like everything sucks no matter what and I have no control? What helps get people to the heart? What are you yearning for in this situation? What do you cherish most about this relationship? So if someone's describing they're really struggling with their spouse or their parent or something like that, how has your life been shaped by these events? What's in your heart right now? Have you always felt this way? That's a really good question. If someone's sharing a lot of bias or prejudice or racism that they have you always felt this way? We would use that one a lot. So these kind of questions can be really helpful, and but there are lots of other ones, and that's where it's fun to have a buddy who can kind of help you draft those kind of questions, you know. Any questions yet? Yes, Lori.
You ask that last question and they say, yeah. Then what do you do?
I've never met anyone who did.
Okay.
Really? Which questions?
Yeah, the last one. Have you always felt this way? So once on a delegation, we were meeting with an Israeli journalist, and he was kind of in his head the whole time. And we had asked, how has the situation affected your life? And he was sharing a lot of facts, and it felt like he was trying to get us to agree with his facts. And one of our people, when it came for question time, he said, I'm just wondering, have you always felt this way about Palestinians? And the person stopped and started like getting teary. And he said, you know what, I didn't. I used to be involved in the peace movement. And he said then about, I guess this was in 2011, so it would have been about 10 years previously, he said there was a suicide bomber at my daughter's school. And she didn't go to school that day, she was sick. But once I realized they would send suicide bombers to kids' schools, then I don't want to have anything to do with them. But he said, I used to be involved with the peace movement. And so then we started asking him about his daughter and reflecting back, like I hear how sad this must be. You really cared about this. You used to work with people. Is there anyone you know who still does that? What would it be like? Do you want us to connect you with anyone who does that? I hear that you don't want to be like this. And he really opened up, and he ended up rejoining one of the groups. So it was really beautiful, you know. So I've actually never met someone. I'm sure there are, and there are people who, no matter what you do, they have the most reinforced castles you've ever seen. And we can't, you know, it has to be a two-way situation. Like we can't make people be different. But it's amazing. People who you think are like totally set a particular way. It's amazing how folks will open up. Yes, there's a subtype of questions that are more deep than these, and we call them the unaskable questions. And they don't start with unaskable questions. You really have to work up to them, but I use them in pastoral care. And so they're the kind of questions, if you can tell that there's something really deep kind of below the surface, it will help the person if you ask it. But they're kind of afraid to go there. So like I did a pastoral care unit in a hospital. And so like an example of an unaskable question, what if you never physically recover from this surgery? I'm wondering if you're worried you might die.
Yeah.
What would it be like if the relationship's over? What if you can never go back to having it the way you had it before? In the Middle East, our basic unaskable question is there any way in which you may have contributed to the conflict? So you never start with those. But folks can get there if you keep meeting with them, if you keep working with them. And sometimes you can tell, like often we know more about each other than people realize. And so you can kind of tell if someone is really guarding something. There might be an unaskable question, but you really, they have to trust you. And you have to be a trustable person. You don't want to kind of have like a gotcha kind of thing. Like you want to do it when it's going to serve them, So when I was in seminary, Jen might remember this, when Professor Topping said sometimes you have to visit people into submission.
Yes.
And so it's like that. And he meant like in a church setting, if someone's really like, you're the new pastor and I can't stand you. And like sometimes you're like, well, I'm going to keep saying hi every Sunday and I'm going to, visit you in the hospital. And I'm, like that. And eventually like, okay, I guess you're an okay pastor. But sometimes, people who have that really reinforced wall, but that they have a lot of hurt, you just got to stay with it sometimes, and it's amazing. I've really seen people transform. Again, I wouldn't do this kind of work if I didn't think people could transform, and I wouldn't keep doing the work if I hadn't seen people transform. But I've seen a lot of that, but it's very slow. And so if you want fast results, if you don't like looking at your shadow side, and if you want fast results, this isn't the business for you. You want to go somewhere else. But yes, so that's what I have for that. I think I have 15 more minutes for the hardest stuff that we have. Are there any more questions about deepening questions? Yes, Gordon.
Is there one question that fits all, a question that fits all, to establish somebody's values, what you think maybe your values are different? Is there one question? It's not for me like
Oh, sorry, you can go past it. Well, usually you can kind of get a sense of what their values are. If you can't get a sense at all, more like, would you like to say more about that? I'm wondering, like, has it always been that way for you? What has that been like for you, to help them kind of drill deeper?
It's a drilling.
It's a drilling.
It's not
Yeah, there isn't a quick fix, but like drilling deeper And then, oh, and another thing is people don't like it if you act like you know more about them than they know about themselves. So be careful not to phrase things. I know that's surprising, right? Um, um, but so try to frame things. So even when you're reflecting back, you're like, it sounds like you really care about family. Is that true? Or like, it sounds like that was such a difficult situation for you and you're hoping you never have to live through that again. Is that right? Like little kind of like checking in kind of phrases can help, because otherwise they might feel, they might be kind of opening and then like, wait a minute, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to therapize me? Leave me alone. So that can help people feel like, okay, this is safe. And again, only use these skills for good. Don't use these to manipulate people into lending you their car or something, right? So you only want to use these because you're trying to help, right? So yes, so that's what I have for that. Now, we're skipping ahead a lot, so some of the language I'll have to explain. But people said, oh, but I have this difficult person I have to talk to. Or what if we get on Parliament Hill and people are jerks there? What are we going to do? So I have two slides for you. So the first, preparing to speak from the heart. So this is skipping ahead. So we've listened from the heart, we've done all the things. How do we speak our truth in a heart-centered way? And so this is how we prep to do that. And that's where I said it's scaffolded. So this is using everything else we've learned. So the first thing, if you're like, okay, I have to have the hard conversation, or okay, I'm at the rally and there's a counter rally and I'm going to go over and I'm going to try to talk to them. So do these things first if you have time. So stop, recenter yourself, breathe, tune into your heart, kind of try to make sure that you're in that open-hearted space and you're not just in an anxious space, or you're not just in your head going to explain why they're wrong and stupid. So try to be in your heart. Call on the fair witness. So that part of us that's, the higher level that's looking down from the balcony, is there anything we can see there? So again, if there's like a counter rally, like, okay, what's going on? Well, okay, there was a lot of traffic today. People are probably going to be stressed about that. And, I know that last song we did, maybe that was going to rub people the wrong way. I don't know. I love that song, but maybe they weren't going to like that. Okay. And I can see, well, things are getting a little hostile. Okay. And trying to get like a bigger picture on what's going on. Unpacking our triggers and judgments as best we can. Hopefully you can do that in 30 seconds or less. No pressure. So that's why we work on this for a long time, but doing your best to try to do that. Examining, what am I yearning for here? So if what I'm really yearning for is to make them agree with everything I say and think, maybe don't have that conversation. Maybe that's not the right thing. Then you're not doing compassionate listening. Then you're trying to trick them into agreeing with you. But if you're yearning for connection, if you're yearning to understand, if you're yearning to really connect with people and open, and again, I was talking to Keith maybe about how this peacemaking is a third way. It isn't making everybody on side A or everybody on side B, but it's the third way. So yeah, what are we yearning for here? Admitting what part of this is ours. Is there anything I've done to contribute to this situation? As my Israeli partner who I led these trips with would say, like, was I in there beating people with my peace signs? And then am I going to yell at them for beating people with signs? So did I contribute to this at all? Hold yourself in compassion, because this stuff is super hard. Take on their perspective for a few minutes. So again, try to widen perspective. What would this be like? Are they going to feel threatened? Are they going to feel like you're coming in from outside or you're manipulating them? What's this going to feel like for them? Check your intentions. Do you want to deepen this relationship? If you're setting up to have a difficult conversation with your friend, but you and your friend have drifted apart and you don't actually want to continue that relationship, consider your intentions before you have that. Because if your goal is to stay friends permanently, then you might want to handle that differently than if your goal is to kind of have a closing conversation and then part ways. Make sure you kind of know your intention ahead of time. And are you attached to proving that you're right? Again, if you are, then you're not doing compassionate listening. This isn't just about making people be like us. And then the last step is speaking from the heart. And then you go for it. And then the way that we go for it, and this is a script, and obviously you can do this however you want, but this is the basics script that we have, which we hope is helpful. So plan an opening at a good time. Don't try to have a really difficult conversation in 30 seconds while waiting for a bus. That will not go well. Don't try to have it when someone's running late for a meeting, or when someone's already really upset about something else stressful that just happened. Make sure you have a good time to do it. Create a bridge to connect. So that can look like, hey, Jace, I really appreciate you coming here today. Is this a good time to talk? I really value the connection we've had on the train. I was wondering if we could spend a little more time, talking right now. I want to talk about something awkward I said yesterday. So kind of a reaching out, hey, I know that, you're my mother-in-law, and, we've been in relationship for a long time, and I really value this relationship. And I was wondering if you have some time, could we talk more about the holidays coming up? I want to get your sense of something, So some kind of bridge to connect, showing that you value the person. Or at like a rally, hey, I see that, you're out here as a counter protester, and, you took time out of your day. This is obviously something that's really important to you. I was wondering if you have a few minutes. I really want to just hear your perspective, hear what's going on with you, and kind of share about what we're trying to do here today. Because I feel like maybe it's not landing well with you. Sharing some facts as you understand them. So I'm noticing, this thing happened, or yesterday when we had that altercation, it seems like such and such a thing happened. I know I wasn't in a good frame of mind. Maybe I said this, or this thing occurred. I know you're here today, and you see that we brought in folks from out of town. This is the facts as I get them. Share how you're impacted. Maybe you feel threatened by our situation. I want to let you know, if you're yelling, it's kind of stressful for our group. I was hoping we could sit down and talk, or, last time when you yelled at me, or when you said I can't see my grandkids anymore, that's been really hard for me. I was wondering if maybe we could talk about this some more. Reveal and name your assumptions. That's the Brene Brown, because the story I'm telling myself, such and such a thing seems to have happened. I feel this way about it. The story I'm telling myself is this. I'm wondering, was that your intention? This kind of, it's like drilling deeper into it. Take responsibility for your part in the situation. Anything you may have done, even if you feel like your part was like this and their part was like this. If you acknowledge this, it can be hard. If you're working with someone who has narcissistic tendencies, it can be hard, because if you admit this, they're like, see, you knew you were the problem. And again, if they have a thick enough castle, we can't make them not have a thick enough castle. But for most people who don't have personality disorders, if you start to do that, they're going to want to soften too, and well, yeah, I probably shouldn't have called you a moron. Yeah, you're right. That probably wasn't respectful. It helps other people kind of open up, Express your values and needs going forward using I statements, which is an NVC thing, nonviolent communication. What I really need in the future. So if I'm supposed to meet my friend for coffee and she cancels on me for the third time, I can say, hey, I know we were going to meet for coffee this week and you canceled. I know you have a lot going on, and I really value this relationship. I'd really like to see you. I know you're very busy, but I did notice that's the third time you've canceled. The story I'm telling myself is, maybe you're not wanting to spend time with me right now. And that's hard, because I really care about our relationship. I know it can be difficult, because maybe the last time we met, maybe I talked about myself the whole time. So maybe you're not that excited to see me, and I'm sorry that I did that. I was going through something. But in the future, I want you to know that you can be honest with me. And so I really want to make sure that we can be open and honest with each other. So is this a relationship you'd like to continue? If so, what can we do together? So any kind of, what I really need is, my hope is we can repair. If you're here today, I really want to listen to you. I want to understand your perspective. We don't want our peace movement to be seen as a threatening thing. I'm wondering, how is it landing with you? What's hard about what we're doing? Do you see any way that we can bridge and work together on something? I'm sure there's stuff you care about that I care about too. What could we do together? What would that look like? Because what we really hope for is safety for all of us, equality for all of us. And finally, restating a positive affirmation for the relationship. I've had it happen before, where folks started out open and then they're closing down, because they're feeling like, well, now the onus is on them to apologize. And so then, I'm only saying this. I'm only saying this because I really care about this relationship. I worry you don't hear that I really value our friendship, but I do. So I'm wondering, what do you think we can do to repair? Do you think it's possible for us to repair? You know, that kind of a thing. And I'd say I try to do this, and it goes well about 75% of the time. Not every time, but about 75% of the time, which is pretty good. So 25% of the time, maybe I was too much of an asshole last time, and they don't want to hear it. Or maybe their castle is just too reinforced, and I don't have the skills for that. But about 75% of the time, it goes pretty well. So that's what I have. And I think we should be at 10. So, thank you for listening. So, not bad. 10 weeks in 2 hours.
That's pretty amazing.
We did it. I'm proud of us.
4 minutes left if this is right.
We did it. 4 minutes left. Is that true? Oh, 3 minutes left.
Whatever.
Oh, perfect.